Welcome to Warriors of the World. Today we'll be exploring the lethal mastery of English longbowmen, the medieval snipers who changed warfare forever. Subscribe now to join our community and support this project. Now, let's begin. The whistle of arrows darkening the sky. The terrifying thuds as they find their targets. The screams of heavily armored knights brought down by simple wooden shafts. This was the revolutionary sound of medieval warfare transformed. The English longbow, a simple weapon of yew wood that could launch a heavy arrow over 250 yards with devastating force, became the medieval equivalent of the machine gun. In the hands of trained archers, it could penetrate plate armor at close range and create a deadly rain of arrows that shattered cavalry charges and decimated infantry formations. What many don't realize is that becoming a longbowman wasn't just a profession, it was a lifetime commitment that physically transformed the archer. Archaeological excavations of archer graves reveal skeletal deformities caused by the immense draw weight of these bows, which typically required 100 to 160 pounds of force to fully draw. Modern enthusiasts practicing with authentic replicas develop massive muscle imbalances within months. The longbow's tactical advantage was its rate of fire. A skilled archer could loose 10 to 12 arrows per minute, meaning an army of 5,000 archers could unleash up to 60,000 arrows in a single minute. Imagine the psychological impact on an advancing army facing this deadly storm, knowing that any moment could bring sudden death from above. This devastating efficiency wasn't an accident of history, but the result of deliberate military planning that would revolutionize warfare for centuries to come. The English longbow wasn't actually English in origin. It was borrowed from the Welsh, who had been using similar weapons for centuries before the English adopted them. Following Edward I's conquest of Wales in the late 13th century, the English witnessed firsthand the devastating effectiveness of Welsh archers using tall bows made of single pieces of yew. What separated the Welsh bow from other contemporary bows was its length, typically standing as tall as the archer himself, around 6 feet. This length allowed for a deeper draw and greater stored energy than shorter bows. The English recognized this superiority and began incorporating Welsh archers into their armies while simultaneously developing their own longbow corps. Archaeological finds at the wreck of the Mary Rose, Henry VIII's warship that sank in 1545, revealed 172 longbows in remarkable preservation. Analysis showed they were made primarily from yew wood imported from continental Europe, specifically Spain and Italy. These bows averaged 6.5 feet in length with a draw weight of 150 to 160 pounds, requiring immense strength to use effectively. The transformation of the longbow from a hunting tool to a devastating weapon of war paralleled England's rise as a medieval military power. While continental European armies invested heavily in heavily armored knights and men-at-arms, England developed a more balanced force with the longbow as its technological edge. By the outbreak of the 100 Years' War in 1337, the English had already been using the longbow in Scotland and Ireland, but the conflict with France would elevate the weapon to legendary status and change military tactics forever. What made the difference wasn't just the weapon itself, but England's systematic approach to creating a nation of archers. Every Englishman shall have a bow. This wasn't just a military slogan but actual law in medieval England. In 1252, the assize of arms required every able-bodied man between 15 and 60 years old to maintain weapons appropriate to their station, with a longbow mandated for commoners. This created a national reserve of skilled archers that could be called upon in times of war. King Edward III took this further in 1363 by banning all sports except archery on Sundays and holidays. The intended effect was to ensure that every Englishman practiced regularly with the longbow. Parish records show that villages maintained butts, earthen archery ranges where men were required to practice after church services. This national focus on archery training created an unparalleled pool of skilled archers. While continental knights spent their time jousting and practicing swordplay, common English farmers and craftsmen developed extraordinary upper body strength and precision with their bows. The physiological evidence is striking. Skeletal remains of English archers show significant bone deformations, with enlarged left arms and twisted spines from years of drawing heavy bows. The training began in childhood. Boys as young as 7 started with lighter bows, gradually working up to the full war bow by their late teens. This long-term physical development was necessary. A modern Olympic archer would be unable to even draw a medieval war bow without years of specific training. The most elite archers were professionals who served in garrison towns or as household troops for nobles, maintaining constant readiness. These men formed the backbone of England's military might, earning wages far exceeding those of common laborers. By the outbreak of the Hundred Years' War, England possessed something no other European power had: a large corps of trained killers who could strike from unprecedented distances. The longbow itself was only half of the weapon system. Equally important were the arrows it fired. These weren't just sticks with feathers but precisely engineered projectiles designed for maximum lethality. A typical war arrow, or cloth-yard shaft, measured around 30 inches in length and featured a variety of specialized arrowheads for different targets. The most common was the bodkin point, a narrow, square-section spike specifically designed to punch through mail armor. Against plate armor, archers used heavy bodkins with reinforced tips and narrower profiles to concentrate force on a smaller area. Arrow production was a national industry in medieval England. In 1359, records show that the Tower of London ordered 850,000 arrows, requiring the dedicated work of hundreds of fletchers, arrowmakers. Quality control was strict. Arrows had to be perfectly straight and consistent in weight to maintain accuracy. Each arrow contained 3 components demanding specialized craftsmanship: the ash or birch shaft, the steel head, and the goose feather fletchings. By law, every shipment of goods into England had to include bowstaves or arrow materials, showing the strategic importance of archery supplies. The Fletchers' Guild closely guarded their techniques for creating arrows that would fly true over long distances. Each arrow was fletched with 3 goose feathers, typically taken from the same wing of the goose to ensure consistent aerodynamics. The feathers were attached with glue made from fish swim bladders and then bound with silk thread. When loosed en masse, these arrows created what chroniclers described as a cloud that blotted out the sun. The psychological impact of thousands of arrows in flight cannot be overstated. The sound alone was terrifying, described as the rush of giants' wings by one French account. This weapon would transform warfare at Crécy in a way that would shock all of Europe. August 26, 1346. Near the village of Crécy in northern France, the English army under King Edward III took a defensive position on a hillside. Outnumbered more than 2-1 by the French, Edward arranged his approximately 7,000 to 10,000 men in 3 divisions, each with a corps of dismounted men-at-arms flanked by wedges of longbowmen. The French, confident in their numerical superiority and the prowess of their mounted knights, launched a series of disorganized charges uphill against the English position. What followed was a massacre that would change warfare forever. As the French knights charged, English archers unleashed their deadly volleys. Contemporary accounts suggest that over 500,000 arrows were fired during the battle. The effect was devastating. Horses were struck multiple times, throwing their heavily armored riders to the ground where they became vulnerable to follow-up volleys and counterattacks. French crossbowmen attempted to counter the English archers but were at a severe disadvantage. A skilled crossbowman could fire only 2 to 3 bolts per minute compared to the longbowmen's 10 to 12 arrows. Furthermore, a sudden rainstorm had dampened the crossbow strings, reducing their effectiveness, while English archers simply removed their bowstrings during the rain and reattached them when dry. Wave after wave of French knights charged forward only to be cut down. By nightfall, the flower of French chivalry lay dead on the field, including the blind King John of Bohemia, who had ordered his knights to tie their horses to his so he could participate in the charge. The French suffered approximately 2,000 knights killed and thousands more wounded or captured, while English losses were minimal. Crécy demonstrated that well-trained commoners with longbows could defeat mounted knights, Europe's dominant military force for centuries. The longbow had democratized warfare, challenging the feudal notion that only noblemen could excel in combat. This revolution would be confirmed 9 years later at an even more devastating engagement. The Battle of Poitiers in 1356 confirmed that Crécy was no fluke. Edward, the Black Prince, son of Edward III, led an English force of about 6,000 men, including 3,000 archers, against a French army of approximately 11,000 under King John II. Learning from Crécy, the French initially planned to dismount their knights and advance on foot, hoping to mitigate the effectiveness of the English archers. However, due to poor discipline and command confusion, many French knights remounted and charged directly into the English position. The English had established a strong defensive position with natural obstacles channeling the French advance into killing zones covered by concentrated archery fire. As at Crécy, the longbowmen devastated the advancing French, creating chaos in their ranks. What made Poitiers particularly disastrous for the French was the capture of King John II himself, along with his youngest son and numerous high-ranking nobles. This catastrophic defeat forced France to sign the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, ceding large territories to England and agreeing to pay an enormous ransom for their king. Military historians often overlook a crucial tactical innovation at Poitiers, the combined arms approach. English archers didn't win the battle alone but worked in coordination with dismounted men-at-arms who protected them from direct assault while capitalizing on the confusion created by arrow volleys. This integration of missile and melee troops represented a significant evolution in warfare. After Poitiers, European armies scrambled to adapt to the longbow threat. Advances in plate armor accelerated, with new designs specifically intended to deflect arrows. However, the most effective counter proved to be avoiding pitched battles against English armies and focusing on strategic maneuvering, a significant shift in medieval military thinking forced by the humble bow. October 25, 1415. St. Crispin's Day. In the rain-soaked fields near the village of Agincourt, Henry V's exhausted English army of around 6,000 to 9,000 men, including approximately 5,000 archers, faced a fresh French force at least 3 times their size. The conditions were abysmal. The English had marched over 260 miles in just 17 days, suffering from dysentery and exhaustion. The battlefield was a recently plowed field turned to mud by heavy rain, with the English positioned between 2 woodlands that protected their flanks. Henry arranged his archers in a wedge formation, with many also positioned in the woods on the flanks. He had them hammer sharpened stakes into the ground at an angle, creating a defensive barrier against cavalry charges, an innovation that would prove decisive. When the battle began, the French knights, eager to avenge previous humiliations, charged directly at the English position. The sodden ground immediately became their enemy. Heavily armored men sank ankle-deep in mud, slowing their advance under withering arrow fire. The killing power of the English archers at Agincourt reached its apocalyptic peak. Each archer carried approximately 60 to 72 arrows and likely exhausted their entire supply during the battle. With around 5,000 archers, this means between 300,000 to 360,000 arrows were loosed in a matter of hours, creating what one chronicler described as a storm of steel-tipped death. The narrow battlefield, constricted by woods on both sides, meant the numerically superior French couldn't spread out, instead becoming densely packed as more men pushed forward from behind. This created perfect targets for the English archers, who could hardly miss when shooting into such concentrated masses. As the French knights fell or slowed in the mud, the lightly armored English archers abandoned their bows, drew their mallets and knives, and joined the melee, killing or capturing the immobilized French knights. The French defeat was total, with casualties estimated between 7,000 to 10,000 compared to several hundred English losses. Agincourt cemented the longbow's reputation as the preeminent weapon of the age and elevated its users to legendary status. Shakespeare would later immortalize the battle in Henry V, ensuring the longbow's place in military mythology for centuries to come. Beyond the glory of famous victories, what was daily life like for these medieval snipers? Most professional archers came from the yeoman class, free men who owned small plots of land or worked as skilled craftsmen. These weren't nobility, but neither were they serfs. They occupied a middle ground in medieval society. Professional archers in royal service earned 6 pence per day, 3 times the wage of a common laborer and equivalent to that of skilled craftsmen. This generous pay reflected both the importance of their role and the physical demands of their profession. The physical toll of longbow usage was extreme. Skeletal remains of archers show enlarged left forearms and shoulder deformities from the repetitive stress of drawing weights exceeding 100 pounds thousands of times. Many archer skeletons show arthritis and bone spurs, especially in the drawing hand and shoulder, indicating chronic pain was likely a professional hazard. Equipment maintenance consumed much of an archer's daily routine. Bowstrings required regular waxing to repel moisture. The bow itself needed constant attention to prevent warping or cracking. Arrows required inspection before use to ensure straight flight. Professional archers typically carried their equipment in a canvas bow case and leather quiver, along with spare strings, wax, and arrowheads. In battle, archers wore lighter armor than men-at-arms, typically a padded gambeson, a thick quilted jacket, and perhaps a mail shirt if they could afford it. Most wore an open-faced helmet called a kettle hat. This lighter protection allowed for greater mobility but made them vulnerable in close combat, which is why tactical positioning was crucial. Between campaigns, many archers served as fortress garrisons or in noble households. Others returned to civilian trades, using the considerable strength developed through archery for laboring work. Some found employment training new recruits in the mandatory Sunday practice sessions. The skills developed through longbow mastery, discipline, physical strength, and precision under pressure made these men valuable not just as warriors but as citizens, creating a culture of martial readiness that would influence English society for generations. By the early 16th century, the longbow's dominance on European battlefields was fading. Several factors contributed to its decline, with gunpowder weapons foremost among them. Early firearms like the arquebus and matchlock musket were neither as accurate nor as fast-firing as the longbow, but they offered crucial advantages. Firearms required far less training to use effectively. A longbowman needed decades of practice starting in childhood, while a musketeer could be trained in weeks. As standing professional armies replaced feudal levies, this training efficiency became increasingly important. The penetrating power of early firearms also exceeded that of the longbow against improved plate armor. By the mid-16th century, specialized, proofed armor could withstand longbow shots at most ranges, while bullets could still penetrate. Henry VIII made the last great attempt to maintain England's archery tradition, passing laws requiring all males to practice regularly and banning certain games that competed for their time. He also ordered thousands of longbows for his armies. The Mary Rose, which sank in 1545, carried hundreds of longbows alongside early cannon, showing the transition period between these technologies. The final blow came with changing military organization. Pike and shot formations proved more effective against both cavalry and infantry, with musketeers protected by pikemen in integrated units. These formations, pioneered by Spanish tercios, rendered the longbow tactically obsolete despite its superior rate of fire. By the time of the English Civil War, 1642 to 1651, the longbow had disappeared entirely from military use, relegated to hunting and sport. The last recorded military use of longbows by English forces was during a skirmish in Scotland in 1642, an archaic footnote in a war dominated by pike, musket, and cannon. The decline of the longbow paralleled broader social changes as feudal structures gave way to early modern states. The weapon that had democratized medieval warfare was replaced by newer technologies that would further transform the face of battle. Though the longbow disappeared from battlefields centuries ago, its legacy endures in military thought, popular culture, and English national identity. The victories at Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt established England as a major military power and have been celebrated in English culture ever since. The longbow revolutionized medieval warfare in three significant ways. First, it demonstrated the effectiveness of missile troops against heavy cavalry, ending the knight's unchallenged dominance. Second, it showed that commoners could be decisive on the battlefield, challenging aristocratic military monopolies. Finally, it highlighted the importance of national training systems and standardized equipment centuries before modern military organization. The longbow also influenced battlefield tactics that would persist long after its use ended. The integration of missile and melee troops, the importance of terrain selection, and the use of prepared defensive positions all became standard elements of European warfare. Modern military archery survives in surprising places. During World War II, British Commando Jack Churchill famously carried a longbow into battle, claiming the only confirmed longbow kill of the war. More significantly, the compound bows used by modern special forces for silent operations descend directly from the military archery tradition pioneered by English longbowmen. Archaeological research continues to reveal new details about these medieval warriors. In 2013, isotope analysis of archer skeletons from the Mary Rose indicated that many came from southern Europe or beyond, suggesting that by Tudor times, professional archers were recruited internationally rather than raised domestically. The English longbowman stands as one of history's most effective warrior types, a common man whose lifetime of training created an elite soldier capable of defeating the most heavily armored knights of his age. In their hands, a simple wooden bow became not just a weapon but a revolutionary force that shaped European history, military science, and the course of warfare for centuries to come. Subscribe now, become a member, turn on notifications, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment so we can compare our knowledge and sources. Thank you for following our channel. Until our next strategic journey, here at Warriors of the World.